Hey, while you in the first 5 seconds of the video, go ahead, like and subscribe.
How are you doing today? Great, that is great. My name is Asa. I am from Israel United in Christ. Today we are doing a presentation on Black history and Juneteenth. So we're gonna go into some things concerning Black history that's not taught in school, some things that don't get covered. So you may learn some things today, or you may already be aware of these things. But our job here is to inform you of some information that you may or may not know. Next slide. So this is our mission statement. Israel United in Christ was started in 2003 by our three bishops, Bishop Nathaniel, Bishop Yahusap, and Bishop Kanan. We are a Bible-based organization teaching who the Blacks and Hispanics are, God's chosen people, and how they must carry themselves. All right, next slide. All right, so why Deuteronomy 28? Why is Deuteronomy 28 important? Why are we going there? Because in Deuteronomy 28, we find out who God's chosen people are. We find out the condition that they're living in. Because by show of hands, who's heard of the Israelites? By show of hands, you can raise your hand, okay? How many of you have watched the movie 10 Commandments? Probably comes on during the holidays with Charleston Heston. He's the actor that plays Moses in the movie. Right, we're all familiar with that. All right, so let's go to Deuteronomy 1 and verse 1. Deuteronomy 1 and verse 1.
The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 1 and verse 1. These be the words which Moses spake unto all Israel on this side Jordan in the wilderness, in the plain over against the Red Sea, between Paran and Tephel, and Laban and Hazeroth, and Dazahab.
So why do we go to that particular chapter and verse? When you write a letter, or when you're reading a letter, I should say, if you want to find out who the letter is written to, you have to go to the beginning. So Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verse 1 just showed us who wrote the words and who the audience was. The audience is who? Israel. And the author, the writer of those words is Moses. We all heard that, correct? So now, let's go to this verse, verse 15. This also here is an image from the dark ages of Moses. And that's contrary to what we see on movies and TV. But we're going to dig into the Bible and get more information. Verse 15. This is the verse actually that we're going to read here. Verse 15, Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 15. Read that.
The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28 and verse 15. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee.
Let's read that again from the top, because when we read things, we want to take our time to digest what's being said. Read.
But it shall come to pass.
So it said, it shall come to pass, meaning future tense. Read.
If thou wilt not hearken.
Now wait, the thou in the verse is Israel. Remember we went to the first chapter. First verse, it said Israel. Israel's the audience. So Moses is speaking to Israel. And he's telling them what? Read.
If thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe, to do all his commandments and his statutes which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee.
So he was telling Israel, the Israelites, that if they do not listen to everything that God told them, bad things would happen to them. Because what did he say a couple of verses up? Verses 15 through 68 lists the curses that would happen to the Israelites if they did not listen. Verse 1 through 14 lists the blessings that the Israelites would have if they did listen to God. All right? Let's go to verse 16.
Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 16.
Mm-hmm.
Cursed shall be in the city. Cursed shall thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field.
So Moses said, if you don't listen to God, you'll be cursed in the city. Now remember what I said before we started. In this chapter, you're going to find out who the Israelites actually are. Because Moses told them, for not listening to God, you will be cursed in the cities you live in. Next slide. So now the Bible is going to start to become real to you as you listen. They're not just words. Moses said these things, but did these things happen? When we look at all races of people on the face of the earth, and we examine every nationality, their living conditions, and where they live and where they dwell, it's one group of people that are always in poverty-stricken areas. And I'm saying one group. You may know them as three groups, the way I say it: blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. They're always in the worst conditions, no matter where you live. Even in Brazil, our people that live in what is known as the favelas, that would be considered a ghetto, a slum. What is happening in the favelas? Gang violence, drug selling, and drug using. Same thing on the south side and the west side of Chicago, the east side of Chicago. But now we're going to get history to connect it with the Bible. So read that again. Cursed shalt thou be where?
Cursed shalt thou be in the city.
Cursed shalt thou be in the city. Who here is familiar with Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre of 1921? Show of hands. So those of you who don't have your hands up, that are not familiar, we're going to go into what this is talking about. Who's familiar with Black Wall Street? So some of the same hands are going up. This was actually what took place here. Black Wall Street was a thriving black community in the 1920s, and it wasn't demolished, like being renovated or worked on. It was destroyed. Racist mobs came through this area in Tulsa, Oklahoma, bombed it, and murdered people. It's a common photo that I often mention as we do these presentations. It's a picture of a little boy holding his sister, and her head is missing because she lost her head during this attack. This was an attack. In this community, there were black bus companies, black cab companies, black barbershops, stores, theaters, and they were all destroyed. So when we read the Bible, read that verse again.
Cursed shall thou be in the city.
So now we're connecting the dots. This is cursed in the city. The Israelites did not listen to God, so as a result, we will be cursed in the city. That's why a lot of black businesses do not thrive. They don't last. They often fail. Here's another example. Is anyone, by show of hands, familiar with Lake Lanier? Lake Lanier. No, okay? This is something you're going to learn today. I myself was not. I had to look into this. This was also a thriving black community in Oscarville, Georgia. Now, it's a lake here. It's like it was never there. How did this community disappear or end? Black men were accused of rape, and the same thing. Mob came through, destroyed it. Now you have Lake Lanier, which was formerly known as Oscarville, Georgia. This was a community here. You can look this up. There's articles on this. Read that again.
Cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field.
So now we have history to connect with the Bible. Now we're seeing by historical fact, biblical fact, who God's chosen people are. Now it says, cursed shall thou be in the field. When you examine any race of people, who specifically was cursed in the field when you look through history? That was the blacks, Hispanics, and natives. Here you have a photo. You have a boy, he appears to be, I would give him maybe 2 years old, and he's picking cotton. That is a curse. But remember what it said in verse 15. If you refuse to listen to God, curses will be upon you and your people. Curses are bad things. This is a bad thing. Really quick, give me Jeremiah 2 and verse 14. And as you look at this photo here, it wasn't just, because oftentimes we think about slavery, we think it was just the adults, right? We think it was just the adults doing the labor. No, it was children and also women. You have women here picking cotton. Yes, you have photos of the men, but women and children were also picking cotton. Never got paid for it. This was free slave labor. Read that verse for me, please.
The book of Jeremiah, chapter 2 and verse 14. Is Israel a servant? Is he a homeborn slave? Why is he spoiled?
So this is in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah was speaking this thing through the Lord. Speaking of who? The nation of Israel. Because even when you read the Bible, the nation of Israel was always getting put in captivity. But what was the cause of them going into captivity or slavery? Disobedience to God. That's where it boils down to. Every time you read the Bible, they would always go into slavery for not listening to God. Likewise here, what we're looking at. So now the Bible is not just a book that's sitting on your grandmother's table at home. It's a real historical book, and we're connecting the dots for you with images and history. Next slide. Now wait, read that verse again in verse 16.
Verse 16, Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 16.
Mm-hmm.
Cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field.
How are the blacks and Hispanics cursed in the field today? They work job after job and still struggle. Like if you look at the climate of a lot of the neighborhoods, you may live in an impoverished neighborhood, but your rent is through the roof. You may have a job that pays $30 an hour, $25 an hour, but you still are struggling. Why is that? Read it again.
Cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field.
The curses for disobedience. That's actually, when you read the Bible, that's what that whole chapter is titled, the curses for disobedience. These are the curses for disobedience. Next slide. Let's read verse 17.
Verse 17. Cursed shall be the basket in thy store.
Mm-hmm. Read it again.
Cursed shall be thy basket in thy store.
So when it says, cursed shall be thy basket in thy store, that is where you store your funds. That's where you store your food. We as a people, when you look throughout history, we had no basket, no store. The fruit that we planted on those plantations, we didn't reap the benefits of it. Even today, black businesses fail. It's hard for us to have success. For example, Garrett Morgan made the traffic light. Is his family being compensated for that? No. Cursed shall be thy basket in thy store. Here you have an example. Now we have historical examples. The red summer of 1919. You can look these things up. Cursed shall be thy basket in thy store. Now we have examples. Then here you have the Detroit destroyed summer, 1967. Who saw the movie Detroit? It's old now. Show of hands. Detroit, that came out, I think maybe like 2014. Mm-hmm. That went into this whole disaster. Black businesses got destroyed during this riot. Another example of this, who remembers when George Floyd was murdered? There were riots all throughout the city of Chicago. Some black businesses actually got destroyed during a riot. Cursed shall be thy basket and thy store. Next slide. So as you go through this presentation, you're going to see without a shadow of a doubt who the Israelites are today, because it's not known who the Israelites are. Some people say, well, they disappeared. Well, no one knows who they are. That's not true. They're here, but they don't know who they are. That's one of the curses that was put on them. So let's read this next one. Deuteronomy 28, verse 18.
Verse 18. Cursed shall be the fruit of thy body.
Stop right there. The fruit of your body is referring to your children. So the same things that we suffered as a people, as adults, they pass down to the children. So the same way you had men being lynched, women being lynched, children were also lynched as well. Who's familiar with Nina Simone's song, Strange Fruit, by show of hands? She's not talking about fruits and vegetables in that song. She's talking about lynchings that happen. And if you if you watch the movie Birth of a Nation, there's a scene where Nat Turner actually saw a family hung in the trees. That's that strange fruit she was talking about. So as the Bible says, cursed shall be the fruit of thy body, our children suffered the same fate. Right here in this photo is a drawing. There's a book called The Destruction of the Indies by Bartolome de las Casas. And he actually drew what the Pilgrims did when they came over here, the conquistadors, the Spanish. When they came over to this side of the earth, this is what they were doing to the Native Americans or indigenous people. Here is a woman, Hispanic woman, hung, and her child hung right next to her. Dogs biting at their feet while they're hung. Then this is a baby actually split in half, and the dogs are eating this baby. This is what happened. So when we have Columbus Day parades, when we have any events surrounding that, and we say, oh, it was peace when he came. No, it wasn't. We have to deal with the truth. This is what happened to Hispanics. Blacks, Hispanics, and natives are the people of God. They are the Israelites. These are the curses that will befall the Israelites for disobedience. Over here, show of hands. Who is familiar with gator bait? By show of hands, gator bait. That's something I had to learn. Okay, one hand in the back. These were actually postcards that were sent between racist whites in the South during this time. So what happened here? Gator bait. What is gator bait? I had to learn this. Didn't know about this. Didn't hear this in school. That's why I said that earlier. They would use the black babies in the swamps to lure the alligator. So they would put the black baby in the swamp. Alligator would bite it. They would pull the alligator to the shore, kill the alligator, and then that's how they would make their alligator shoes, vests, jackets. These are things that were not taught in school. It's a lot of history that's kept away. Read that verse again.
Cursed shall be the fruit of thy body.
This is the fruit of your body, your children being cursed. Not only are the parents suffering this, the children are. You looking at it. Next slide. So you keep hearing me say the blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans are the Israelites. And you're getting proof here. Give me Deuteronomy 28, verse 18. Let's finish reading that verse.
Cursed shall be the fruit of thy body and the fruit of thy land.
The fruit of thy land. Just jumping ahead of myself a little bit. The fruit of thy land. We often hear about the celebration of Thanksgiving, that it was a peaceful celebration. This is what happened. This is your Thanksgiving. A celebration of destruction of the indigenous people. Because when the Pilgrims came here, they took a lot from the Native Americans. Land, their food source, even what they used to make weapons. What am I talking about? Who has seen this photo here before? By show of hands. Do you know what these two men are standing on top of? Do you know what this hill is? This is a hill of buffalo bones. If you know any history on the Native Americans, they used the buffalo for food. They used it for clothing because of the fur. They used the bones for weapons and tools. So this is their whole food source taken away. This is bones of dead buffalo. So if you take away a person's food source, how can they fend for themselves? So what else was taken? Because we're seeing the Native Americans fit was said here in the Bible. What else was taken? Land, because it said, in the fruit of thy land. Indian land for sale. How can you sell something that belongs to a person? They didn't sell it to you. They were actually still living on the land. But yet we have a sign. Indian land for sale. Get a home of your own, easy payments. Fine lands in the west. Irrigatable, grazing, agriculture, dry farming. You're advertising where somebody lives and dwells at. They had families here. But when the pilgrims came, followed by the building of the train tracks, their land was stripped and taken from them. Let's finish this verse. In the fruit of thy land,
the increase of thy kind, and the flocks of thy sheep.
That's talking about what? Your cattle. The buffalo was the cattle of the Native Americans. They used that animal as a source of food and many other things. Next slide. Let's read verse 19 now.
Verse 19. Cursed shalt thou be when thou comest in, and cursed shalt thou be when thou goest out.
What is he saying to the Israelites? Moses is saying to the Israelites, you'll be cursed when you're born, you'll be cursed when you die. This is Tony Thompson, born and died a slave. This man was born a slave and died a slave. Here we have in the middle, Matilda McCrea, transatlantic slave trade survivor, meaning this woman actually came on the first slave ships that docked here. That's not something that's taught. That's something that we never hear about. I didn't hear about these things. Last one, Zora Neale Hurston, transatlantic slave trade survivor, another person, a man who was actually on the boats, meaning he lived from being on the boat to getting sold to going through chattel slavery and then dying. What did the Bible say? Read that again.
Cursed shalt thou be when thou comest in, and cursed shalt thou be when thou goest out.
So you're born going through curses, going through bad things and hardship. You die going through bad things and hardship. Next slide. Let's read this verse here.
Verse 20. The Lord shall send upon thee cursing, vexation, and rebuke, and all that thou settest thine hand unto for to do.
So we wonder why it's so hard for blacks and Hispanics and natives to try to rise above the condition that they're in. It's not because you're not smart. It's not because you don't know how to do anything. It's because the curses of disobedience is on you. So if disobeying God is causing all of this, the solution is to do what? Obey what God says. Read on.
Until thou be destroyed, and until thou perish quickly, because of the wickedness of thy doings, whereby thou hast forsaken me.
Remember, when you get a Bible, that chapter from verse 15 to 68 are the curses for disobedience. Next slide. So here you have examples of cursing, vexation, and rebuke. Ted Landsmark assaulted in Boston. These are real things that took place. Trayvon Martin murdered. Ahmaud Arbery. Who saw the video of Ahmaud Arbery? Very sad. Breaks your heart. You almost come to tears. But now we understand why those things happen. We must obey God. Being God's people doesn't mean you go around and you do what you want to do. No, you have a calling. You have important things required of you. Let's get Deuteronomy 10 and 12 really quick. Because hearing all of this, it's like, wow, all of these things are happening. That's why that's happening. It may sound sorrowful, but remember, let's show you what God requires of us. Because who has grandchildren? Probably the whole room. Grandchildren. You have rules that you give your grandchildren. You have a certain way of living that you expect them to uphold. So the Israelites have a certain way of living that God expects them to uphold. And when they don't, we are reading the punishments. Your grandson gets F's for a semester. You take away what? The video game? That's the punishment. He can't go skate with his friends. That's a punishment. So this is the punishment that God gives the Israelites when they don't listen. Next slide. Let's read that verse 21.
Verse 21. The Lord shall make the pestilence cleave unto thee, until he have consumed thee from off the land, whether thou goest to possess it.
So he said he will make the pestilence cleave unto thee. That word pestilence is referring to disease. So when we look at disease, who's leading in disease? Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. There's actually a video that you can look at where it talks about how Mexico has a high consumption of sweet drinks. Too much sweets leads to what? Diabetes. Too much salt, pork, you end up with what? Hypertension. How many of you know people deal with that? That's a result of bad eating. Next slide. So now we understand. Here's an example. We have the swine flu. Guess what? Not only does God have commandments and rules for the Israelites to follow, he has a dietary law. He has a menu in the Bible that the Israelites are supposed to follow and eat that food. The food he says not to eat, he even tells you is unclean. It's not clean for you to eat. The pig being one of them. H1N1 swine flu. Let's show that. Leviticus 11 and verse 7. And we didn't get Deuteronomy 10 and 12. We can read that after that. But let's go to the Bible and see. Because we're reading about the pestilence now, which is sickness. Why does the sickness happen? For disobedience. Read that, please.
The book of Leviticus, chapter 11 and verse 7. And the swine, though he divide the hoof and be cloven-footed, yet he cheweth not the cud. He is unclean to you.
That part where it says chewing the cud, the cow actually has a digestive system where it cleans the food from the inside. The pig does not have that. You can look at videos on this or read about it. A pig, that's not a clean animal to eat from, which explains why blacks and Hispanics get sick from so much pork consumption. There's even videos of what happens when you pour certain products on top of pork, how maggots come out of it. We're not supposed to eat that animal. So God made the pig, but the pig wasn't for us to eat. Here you have Zika virus. A lot of Hispanics actually experienced this in South America. You had the Ebola outbreak. People in the west coast of Africa experienced that. Then you had COVID-19. You had one point where a lot of blacks and Hispanics wasn't getting affected by it, but then all of a sudden the tide changed. Then you had people with underlying health issues dying from it. A lot of our people, what? High blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, dying from that disease. Let's read that verse again. What did the verse say?
The Lord shall make the pestilence cleave unto thee.
He's going to make sickness stick to you. When something cleaves, is holding on. So he's going to make the sickness stick to the Israelites. Read.
Until he have consumed thee from off the land.
Until it has consumed you. Read.
Whether thou goest to possess it.
Okay, next slide. Next slide. So what are we doing? We are going into Deuteronomy 28 to find out who the people of God are. And so far, you see the dots connected. You see the connection here. Verse 30.
Verse 30. Thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. Thou shalt build an house, and thou shalt not dwell therein. Thou shalt plant a vineyard, and shalt not gather the grapes thereof.
So it's no coincidence. Moses said all of these things, and then you look into history, and it actually happened. It's no coincidence. What is that talking about? What is that talking about? When we got off of the slave ships, some of us was married, believe it or not. It was families that came off of those slave ships. So the Bible is saying, you're going to be in slavery. Some of you are going to be married. Someone's going to take your wife and sleep with her. Did that not happen in slavery? You can watch that in movies like 12 Years a Slave, Django, the butler, Roots. These are things that happen. Then it said, you shall build a house and you won't live in that house. A lot of the big houses, the houses that slave masters lived in, those were built by slaves. The slaves slept in shacks or huts or in barns. Those big houses that were fancy, well-made, they didn't live in that. Now we're getting historical examples of what we just read. Read.
Thou shalt betroth the wife, and another man shall lie with her.
This is a real painting. Remember, they didn't have cameras during these times, so you had to paint images. This is a black woman with 3 men. What do you think they're going to do to her? This is 3 young white men and a black woman. This is 1632. This is in the year 1632. This was painted by Christian Van Coinberg. That's 1632. Blacks and Hispanics was in slavery during that time. Remember, 1492, the conquistadors came to this side of America and enslaved the indigenous or Native Americans and the Hispanics. Over here on this side, what do we have here? The Virginian luxuries. Look at the year on that, 1825. We were in slavery. What is this depicting? You have a man, he's about to be beat here. And then you have his wife taken. Read that again.
Thou shalt betroth the wife, and another man shall lie with her.
Here you have actual images showing you what the Bible is talking about and who it happened to. This is the movie 12 Years a Slave I was referring to. You can look it up and watch it yourself on your own time. This came out in 2013. This character here, her name was Patsy. This is the slave master here. He raped her every day. He wouldn't even let her take a bath. Next slide. Now, you may say, why is this important? Why do you have celebrities on the wall? Because these are Israelites. These are the people of God. But what has happened, the treatment that we received during slavery, we are starting to treat one another this way. Read the verse again.
Thou shalt betroth the wife, and another man shall lie with her.
So we experienced that during slavery, but now we're starting to do that to each other. Give me Hosea chapter 4 and verse 1. Now we're starting to do this to each other. For those of you who don't know who this is Will Smith and his wife Jada. She actually laid with this young man who is a singer. So now that same behavior that we experienced, because the trauma passed down, we never got help, we never got therapy for that. Now we're doing that to each other. Read that verse when you have it.
The book of Hosea, chapter 4 and verse 1.
Mm-hmm.
Hear the word of the Lord, ye children of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
For the Lord have a controversy with the inhabitants of the land.
So it's saying what? God has a problem with the Israelites. Why? Why does he have a problem with them?
Because there is no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land.
There's no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of God. When you look at the young men today, many of us have grandsons, children, teenagers. What are they doing? Terrorizing downtown. Downtown used to be a safe place, but now it's not. Read on.
By swearing and lying and killing.
These are all the things that the Israelites are doing in the places that they live. That's why God said he has a controversy with them. He has a problem with them because this is how they're behaving amongst each other now. Read.
And stealing.
And what?
And stealing.
When George Floyd was murdered in Chicago, it was rioting and looting. I saw a lot of people stealing. You couldn't tell me that was all centered around George Floyd. Some people were just simply stealing. You had a bunch of people running in the store, taking what they wanted. Read.
And stealing. And committing adultery.
And doing what?
And committing adultery.
That's why we had that other slide up there. Because this is what's happening in the black and Hispanic community. Adultery. Taking another man's wife. But where does it come from? It comes from slavery. That's where we learn that behavior. Finish that up.
They break out, and blood toucheth blood.
And what? The Israelites kill one another. Through what? Gang violence. Now you even have babies and women that have been killed at an alarming rate. That's that blood touching blood. We are hurting one another. That's what the Bible is talking about. This is how the Israelites are treating each other today. Let's read this verse 37. Because you might say, okay, if that group of people is the Israelites, why don't they know that? Deuteronomy 28, verse 37. Then we're going to get Isaiah 65.
Deuteronomy 28 and verse 37.
Mm-hmm.
And thou shalt become an astonishment,
Mm-hmm.
a proverb, and a byword among all nations, whether the Lord shall lead thee.
So when you read this verse here, it said the Israelites will become an astonishment. When you're astonished at something, you're surprised. So the blacks and Hispanics are the Israelites. They're the people of God, but they're not acting like it. When you look outside, what's going on? Carjacking, robberies, rape, sex trafficking. This is the behavior of some of the people of God. So that's why the astonishment is there. Young men sagging their pants. But these are the people of God. Young women being loose, being lewd, dressing provocative. But these are the daughters of God. But you might say, why don't they know it? Let's go back to the verse. Read.
And thou shalt become an astonishment,
Mm-hmm.
a proverb.
A proverb is a wise saying. A proverb is a wise saying. All Puerto Ricans carry knives. All black men steal. These are things that said. These are called what? Stereotypes. Read.
A proverb and a byword.
A byword. A byword meaning you're not called by your God-given name. You're not called by the name that God called you. You're called by what? Black. My pants are black. When you look at blacks, they're not the color of these pants. When you look at Hispanics, Mexican, Puerto Rican means port of riches. That's not your God-given name. So that's another thing. That's why. Why don't they know? The name of who we are, our name, our culture, our way of life was taken from us. Give me Isaiah 65 and 15. This is one of the curses of disobedience. Isaiah 65 and 15. Then we're going to get an example from the forefather Daniel. What happened to him when he went into slavery? Read that.
The book of Isaiah, chapter 65 and verse 15.
Mm-hmm.
And ye shall leave your name.
Your what?
And ye shall leave your name.
Your name, read.
For a curse.
So you went from Israel. Israel means a prince that has power with God. It's power in the name Israel. But the Israelites are not known by Israel today. Now it's black, Afro-American, Hispanic, Mexican, Panamanian, Cuban. That's the names we're going by now, not our God-given name. Finish that up.
And ye shall leave your name for a curse unto my chosen. For the Lord God shall slay thee, and call his servants by another name.
Now, Israel is being called by another name. So if you're being called by another name, you don't know your true nationality. You don't know where you come from. Let's get Daniel chapter 1, verse 9. Because it's not something that just happened when we went into this transatlantic slave trade. It happened in other captivities or slaveries that we were in. Read that.
The book of Daniel, chapter 1, 6.
Yeah. Yep.
In verse 6. Now among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel.
The children of Judah, who are who? The Israelites. What happened? Read.
Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
We're all familiar with those three men. Daniel, Hananiah, and Mishael. That was their God-given name. That was their real name. What happened when they went into slavery under the Babylonians? Read.
Unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names.
He did what to them?
Gave names.
He did what to them?
Gave names.
He gave them names. That's why what happened to us when we got off the boat? Now you are Samuel McDougan. You got the name of the slave master. We take so proudly of Jenkins and Johnson and Red, Williams. Those were names of the slave masters when you dig deep. Remember what the scripture said. You will become a proverb and a byword among all nations. Everything that is you will be taken away from you, and you will be given another name. So if you're given another name, you're given another culture. You're given another way of life that you follow. Let's read this verse. Verse 47. Deuteronomy 28, verse 47. Why did these things happen? The Lord is going to tell us. God is going to tell us why these things happen to his people. Read.
The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, and verse 47.
Matter of fact, let's start at verse 46.
Verse 46. And they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder.
So these bad things would be on the Israelites for a sign. Outside this building, it says the Montgomery place. That lets you know you're where. You're at the Montgomery place, correct? So these bad things that you read about are going to identify who the people of God are. Read.
And they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever.
And they would be upon the Israelites forever. You would be able to open the Bible up, read, and look, and say, these are the people of God. They fit what's being said here. Verse 47.
Because thou servest not the Lord thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart for the abundance of all things.
So the Israelites did not want to serve God. They didn't have joy in serving God. So he said, because of this, what would happen? Read.
Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies.
Therefore, so because you don't want to serve me, you're not happy to do what I tell you to do. Like, for example, when we read in Leviticus chapter 11 and verse 7, that's one of the rules that God gave the Israelites. Don't eat the pig. It says, because thou servest not the Lord with joyfulness and gladness. The Israelites weren't glad to follow that rule. Many other rules that he gave them, they weren't glad to follow that. So what did he say? Therefore what?
Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee.
So that's who allowed slavery to happen. God did. Why? Because of what? Disobedience. Read.
Sin against thee and hunger.
And wait, it said in hunger. So the Israelites would have to serve their enemies in hunger. So if they wanted food, they would have to go to their enemies. Read.
And in thirst.
If they wanted anything to drink, they would have to go to their enemies. Read.
And in nakedness.
If they wanted clothing, they would have to go to their enemies. With all three of these things, food, clothing, and water, the blacks and Hispanics do not own a vast majority of their own grocery stores. They don't own their own textile to make clothing. They have to go to other races of people to get these things. Read on.
And in one of all things.
And in one of all things. Whatever the Israelites would want, need, or have to have, they would have to get it from someone else. Why? Because of what? Disobedience from God. That's what it all boils down to. As we continue the presentation, it's not leaving disobedience. You don't want to do what God says, so now you have to depend on someone else. Read on.
And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee.
So that he who put yokes or chains on blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans' necks, conquistadors, pilgrims, they did these things. So when we read the Bible, it said yoke of iron. That's no coincidence. This is not just something that happened out of nowhere. Why is the Bible saying this and then history shows that? It's Bible prophecy. It's truth. Those things weren't said for no reason. These are the only people that experienced this. Next slide, next photo. This here, before we go to the next slide, this is an image from Brazil. clothing line. I can't remember the clothing line. They decided to take this image here and make a T-shirt out of it. You can look that up. I can't remember the clothing line. Verse, we'll go here, and then is, I believe, 68 is the next one. Let's read that. Deuteronomy 28, verse 64.
The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, and verse 64. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from the one end of the earth even unto the other.
Something we don't talk about. This is what happened during slavery. Families were destroyed, ripped apart. So when you look at any race of people, only the blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans were scattered in that fashion. If you watch the movie 12 Years a Slave, they took the woman's 2 children and sold them to another state. And you got to think, this happened repeatedly. This didn't just happen with one family that came off the boat. This happened repeatedly. They would take a husband, give you an example, sell him to New York, take the wife, sell her to St. Louis, and take the daughter, sell her to Atlanta, take the son, sell him to Houston. That's a family destroyed. But what does the Bible say? And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people. Meaning the Israelites would be scattered all over the face of the earth. And what would happen when we got scattered to these places? Read.
And there shalt thou serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone.
Remember, your nationality was taken from you. Your race was taken from you. Your God-given name was taken from you. So if you take my whole culture from me, what do I have left? I have your culture. If you're enslaving me, you're going to teach me what you believe in. So blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans learned Christianity and slavery. Because when you read the Bible, remember, we have to believe what the truth is. We have to follow what is truth. We can't follow lies. Jesus Christ does not look like this. Because if we believe in God, we have to believe and go with what the Bible truly says. Jesus Christ does not look like that. But in slavery, this is what we learned. This is why down south a lot of blacks are Baptists. This is why a lot of Hispanics are what? Catholic. This was learned in slavery. The Bible says it. Many of us probably seen these images in our churches and did not know this is a real man. This is Cesare Borgia. Cesare Borgia, a real man that walked the earth. There's a TV show on his family, and this is the book, The Borgias, by Marion Johnson. Next slide. Here's some facts about this man that people have photos of saying that he is Jesus. What happened? He was the illegitimate son of Pope Alexander VI. He was the 6th Pope of Rome. What did he do? He had the famous artist, Leonardo da Vinci, paint his son as the new image of Christ. So now the whole world believes that this picture of his son is Jesus. You can look these things up yourself. Give me Matthew 24 and verse 4. And it's funny because Christ said something. He gave a warning. It's no coincidence he gave this warning and then this happens in history. Read that.
The book of Matthew, chapter 24 and verse 4. And Jesus answered and said unto them, take heed that no man deceive you.
He said, take heed, listen. Don't let someone trick you. That's what it means to be deceived, tricked. Don't let anyone trick you. Why? Why is he saying this? Read.
For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ.
This is the many that came in his name saying that he is Christ. With this image, you have a multitude of movies. They play a lot of them during Easter. Son of God, Passion of the Christ, Jesus of Nazareth. Many of us probably seen these movies, but that's that coming in his name saying that they are Christ. Read, and they will do what?
And shall deceive many.
The whole world has been deceived, thinking that this is Christ. And if you tell a people that this is the Son of God, that this is Jesus, they will think that everyone that looks like this image, favors this image, is God-like, and they will look at their people as nothing. Next slide. So this is a more accurate depiction of Jesus Christ. Now let's get the Bible. Remember what he said. Don't let anyone deceive you, for there shall be many that come in my name, saying that they are me, but shall deceive many. Revelation 1, verse 14.
The book of Revelation, chapter 1 and verse 14. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace.
Let's go back up to verse 14, and let's examine this here.
Verse 14.
Because in the images in church, you have a Caucasian man with straight hair, and we just shown with the facts, historical facts, that that's Cesare Borgia that's being put on all the walls in churches. How does the Bible say that Jesus Christ's hair is? Read.
His head and his hairs were white like wool.
Jesus Christ has white, woolly hair. Letting you know what? He is a black man. Only blacks and Hispanics and natives have this texture of hair. Read.
As white as snow.
As white as snow. Read.
And his eyes were as a flame of fire.
Who's familiar with Christ's first miracle? Turning water into wine. He drank wine. When you drink, the whites of your eyes turn red. Read.
And his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace.
If you burn anything, it comes out dark. It comes out black. So he was a dark-skinned man. This is the true depiction of Christ written in the Bible. But we're not taught that. Go back to the other slide, because we have to learn the facts. Why are you telling me that this is him, but the Bible doesn't say that? That's a lie. We have to follow what the truth is, because that's important. If I only think that I have to look a certain way to be successful or loved, that's what I'm going to go with. Next slide. Next slide. Now, you may say, okay, I hear all the information. How is that group of people the people of God? Here's more fact. This is a verse that actually made me see the truth. Oh, wow, that's blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans that this is talking about. Let's read that verse.
The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28 and verse 68. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies, for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you.
Let's read this verse again.
And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt.
So stop there. If you know any history, because the places that's mentioned in the Bible, these are real landmass. These are places that actually exist. So when you look at Egypt, when the Israelites first left Egypt, did they leave on a boat or did they walk? They walked. So why is Moses saying that you need a vessel or a vehicle to go back to a place that you walked? That's because he's saying something more here. He's using Egypt to talk about something else. What is that Egypt? Give me that, please.
The book of Exodus, chapter 20 and verse 2. I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage.
Out of the house of where?
Out of the house of bondage.
Out of the house of bondage. So Egypt means slavery. Go back to that slide, and we're going to end it at that verse. Let's read verse 68, that part there again.
And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships.
So now we understand. The Bible just said Egypt was the house of bondage. So he's saying you're going to go back into slavery by ship. Again, we're not talking about a personal preference. We're talking about fact. What people went into slavery on ships, as the Bible says, the blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. Cargo slave ship. Same way Moses said it would happen, that is exactly how it happened. So that's going to conclude the presentation on Deuteronomy 28. We hope that you learned a lot. We hope that you got a lot out of the presentation. Do you have any questions? Yes, ma'am. Then we'll come to you. Yeah.
First?
Yeah, I'm starting with you.
There was something called post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Oh, yes.
And this is something that happens when something happens to your ancestors. It's passed on to your genes, okay? So I don't think the Almighty would want us to suffer. It was so much suffering in your presentation. So I just can't buy that. I think it was too much suffering. I don't think God is putting a curse on you like that. I don't believe that.
Believe it or not, man, he does. When you read the scriptures, he does. When we disobey him, that is the punishment that he placed on us. But if we want to come out of that punishment, if we want to come out of that punishment, sorry, I wasn't speaking in the mic. If we want to come out of that punishment that he put on us, that's a lot of punishment. That just shows you he's very serious. God is very serious. The way to come out of that punishment, one scripture, Joshua 1:8. Because no matter how we feel about it, all of that happened because of disobedience. But this is the solution. How do we change the tide? How do we not go through this suffering? Read.
The book of Joshua, chapter 1 and verse 8. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth.
We should be speaking those words. Read.
But thou shalt meditate therein day and night.
So we should be meditating, studying these words. Read.
That thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have a good success.
So then we'll have success and be prosperous once we do what God said. Simple solution. How do we stop STDs in the community? Everyone get married. Blacks and Hispanics, we don't do that. It's a lot of single parent households, a lot of children out of wedlock. One of the rules in the Bible is marriage. That's a rule that we can follow. That will stop the suffering.
What is a nation? Nation is men leading by example. Nation is family.